Have you ever felt like you're pouring out all your effort, holding steady in faith, and yet the results are nowhere to be seen? Maybe it feels like good things are happening for everyone but you, despite your consistency, despite your prayers and your best efforts. It's a hard place to be in, watching others experience breakthroughs, especially when you've been doing everything you know to do and doing it diligently. And in those moments, a question naturally surfaces: when will it be my turn? But what if, in those quiet, uncelebrated times, God is working on a deeper transformation within us? One that shifts our focus from being recognized to knowing, seeing, and experiencing His love as the most profound reward. Join me as we peek through God's lenses of love. Today we're diving into the story of the prodigal son, but this time we're focusing on the son who stayed. Luke chapter 15 is our setting for today, and it gives us the familiar scene of a wayward younger brother returning home. But this story is equally about the steadfast yet simmering older brother. So read with me from verse 25 of Luke chapter 15. It says, "Meanwhile, the older son was in the field, and when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friend. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found.'" Through his hard work, loyalty, and quiet struggle with bitterness, we see a picture of someone lost differently. Jesus calls us to examine our hearts for resentment, understand the depth of grace, and learn what it means to fully embrace others as God does. As we unpack this story, we'll look first at the important call for all of us to accept people authentically. The Father's love here is an example of a love that embraces unconditionally, seeing both sons through eyes of compassion and understanding, not by their past. When we talk about acceptance, we're diving into the heart of the gospel. God's love for us that isn't dependent on us having it all together, but on His endless grace. The older brother's immediate response to his younger brother's siblings' return is a mix of bitterness and self-righteousness. He struggles to see his brother as anything but a screw-up who doesn't deserve his father's love. But if we put ourselves in his shoes, can we really blame him? It's easy to see people for what they've done wrong, especially when they've hurt us, disappointed us, or made choices that we don't agree with. But God's love doesn't operate on the terms of our expectations. Acceptance, in the way God models, is about embracing each person as they are. The father didn't wait for the younger son to prove himself. He accepted him right there, covered in the dirt of his mistakes. And in the same way, you and I are called to love others as they are, acknowledging their individuality and their unique journeys. I mean, imagine a friendship where you feel fully accepted, just as you are. Now think about how rare that is. I mean, we all crave relationships where we don't have to prove ourselves or hide our flaws. God's love extended to others through us means creating that same space for people around us. See, acceptance doesn't mean agreeing with every choice someone makes, but it does mean seeing them as God does: valuable, loved, and redeemable. One of the biggest traps the older brother falls in is into comparison. He looks at his younger brother's squandered life and thinks, "Yeah, I would never do that." In that moment, his love for his brother is overshadowed by the resentment born out of comparison. He starts listing all the things he's done right and all the things his brother has done wrong. Comparing ourselves to others warps our perspective, making us feel superior or inferior, but never satisfied. God's love frees us from this trap because His love isn't a competition. It's freely given to all of us. We don't have to feel insecure about others' journeys because God's love is abundant enough for everyone. Have you ever worked in a company where one employee constantly compares themselves to others? They're always measuring their accomplishments against everyone else's. And instead of celebrating their own strengths or being grateful, they're left with either pride or resentment. See, comparison blinds us to the beauty of God's gifts. Each and every one of us has a different story, and it's not meant to be measured against someone else's. Just as the Father loved both His sons uniquely, God loves us uniquely too. The more we accept this, the more we can accept others as they are, letting go of jealousy and comparison. The story makes it clear. Both sons belong to the father, yet the older brother struggles to see his younger sibling as part of the family. He feels entitled to his father's love, thinking it's something that he's earned. And in doing so, he forgets that both he and his brother belong to the Father by sheer grace, not by the things they do or their worth. When we look at those around us, do we see them as God's family? Do we understand that they're equally cherished regardless of their past? See, embracing others as part of God's family means seeking beyond their mistakes, beyond our judgments, and focusing on the fact that God's love includes us all. God calls us to view people not as outsiders, but to be judged, but as brothers and sisters to be loved. Think about people you might be tempted to view as less than because of their choices, because of their appearance or beliefs. How would your perspective change if you saw them as a beloved child of God? Accepting others as a part of God's family involves remembering that grace that was extended to us, even when we didn't deserve it. It's about recognizing that we're all recipients of that same grace, part of that same family, equally cherished by God. Real acceptance is seeing people not by their mistakes, but by their God-given value. It's avoiding comparison, knowing that God's love isn't a scarce resource, and it's embracing people as God's family. Are we accepting those around us with open hearts, the way the Father accepted His Son despite His flaws? Are we welcoming others, not with conditions or comparisons, but with compassion? In our daily lives, this acceptance could look like offering someone a listening ear without judgment, or refusing to hold grudges, or simply giving people the grace to be themselves. It might mean letting go of the scorecard we hold sometimes, and instead inviting them to experience God's love through our actions. When we truly embrace God's love and choose to share it, we reflect the Father's heart in the story, a heart that's open, that's welcoming, and full of grace. So let's dive into what it means to move beyond grudges or jealousy and to celebrate with an open heart. My second point is that we are all called to celebrate with cheer. The older brother in the story of the prodigal son missed a golden opportunity. He missed the chance of celebrating his younger brother. Instead of sharing in the joy, he let bitterness and jealousy take over, clouding his heart from truly seeing the miracle of his brother's transformation. This point challenges you and I to shift from a mindset of resentment to one of rejoicing, particularly in the successes of others. See, because true love, the kind of love that God calls you and I to embody, it rejoices in the victories of others without feeling threatened. The older brother's reaction gives us a glimpse of how easily we can let jealousy undermine our relationships. His brother was lost, but now is found, and the celebration was a powerful symbol of grace. But rather than rejoice, the older brother's pride created a barrier between him and his family. When someone experiences a win in their life, whether it's personal, professional, or spiritual, our immediate reaction might be to compare or to feel envious, especially if we feel they don't deserve it as much as we do. But God calls you and I to do something greater. Grace is a gift meant to be celebrated, not evaluated. The father didn't weigh his younger son's mistakes against his love for him. He simply rejoiced. And the same goes for us. Our love for others shouldn't be grounded in grace, or rather should be grounded in grace, not in keeping score. This doesn't mean we don't recognize faults, but it means we don't let those faults prevent us from loving and celebrating people fully. I mean, think of the times that you've received grace, undeserved second chances, forgiveness, or love when you didn't earn it. How different would our world look if we chose to extend that same grace to others in times of their successes? The older brother struggled to see his siblings return as a positive transformation. It's as though he was trapped in the past, unable to see the person his brother had become. Celebrating others involves recognizing that people can change, and when they do, it's worth celebrating. Often we hold on to grudges or assumptions about people based on who they were, and this blinds us to the beauty of who they're becoming. Imagine celebrating the success of someone you once had a falling out with. Perhaps an old friend or family member who has hurt you, but now they're in a different place, growing and changing. I mean, it takes humility and a big heart to look at past grievances and genuinely feel joy for them. And that's the heart of the Father. He doesn't hold our past against us, but rejoices in every step we take towards growth and transformation. The older brother's resentment kept him from entering the celebration. He was so focused on what he felt he deserved that he couldn't let himself rejoice. Friends, resentment damages our relationships and robs us of our own joy. Holding on to resentment is like choosing to stand outside while everyone else is enjoying the feast inside. Imagine missing out on a joyful moment, a wedding, a graduation, a family gathering, because you let bitterness keep you isolated. That's what resentment does. It builds walls around our hearts, keeping us from fully engaging with the good things happening around us. In God's eyes, love isn't about who deserves what. It's about a heart that can celebrate goodness and joy no matter who it's happening to. Think of how different the story would have been if the older brother had chosen to enter the celebration, to embrace his father, and rejoice with his family. That's the invitation for us too. By choosing to celebrate others instead of envying them, we open ourselves to the joy that God intends for us. We shift from self-centeredness to God-centered love, a love that finds joy in others' blessings and victories. As we celebrate others, we're actually reflecting God's love. We're practicing gratitude for the way God moves in people's lives. Every time we rejoice with someone, we're rejecting resentment and embracing God's generous spirit. The more we celebrate each other, the more we become a community of grace, drawing others towards God's love through our own lives. Another thing we're called to do is recognize God's presence. The third point brings us to something very important. Especially when it seems overshadowed by disappointment or discontent, we need to recognize God's presence. See, the older brother lived with his father every day. He shared meals with him. He worked alongside him, and he had access to everything the father owned, yet he missed the closeness that could have transformed his perspective entirely. Recognizing God's presence is what shifts us from bitterness to blessedness. It reorients our viewpoint, it reveals our purpose, and it renews our faith. A common struggle we face is mistaking God's silence for his absence. The older brother likely felt like his loyalty was overlooked, that his years of service had gone unnoticed, but his father was there, constant, caring, and close. Like him, you and I may feel overlooked or unappreciated, believing God has forgotten us. But God remains near, guiding us even when our hearts doubt it. Often we're too focused on our pain or our envy to notice God's nearness. The older brother's resentment blinded him to the fact that he had always been within the reach of his father's love. In our lives, hardship doesn't indicate God's absence. I want to say that again. In our lives, hardship doesn't indicate God's absence because God is steadfast in his love, even when we feel unseen. By embracing God's presence, we start to let go of resentment and open ourselves up to his love. Part of the older brother's struggle was his inward focus, thinking only of his own sacrifices and his entitlements. This limited his ability to see the father's love for both him and his brother. He missed the celebration, the beauty of grace, and the joy of being close to his father. But when we realign from self-centeredness to God-centeredness, our perspective changes. Instead of asking, "Why not me?" we start to notice the abundant blessings God has given into our lives. The father's words to his son, "All that I have is yours," echoes God's invitation to us. His love and blessings are ours to embrace, but we need to look beyond ourselves and focus on him. Realizing this allows us to celebrate others' joys without envy, knowing our Father's love and grace are abundant. Imagine if the older brother had set aside his resentment and embraced his brother. The celebration would have deepened their bond and his own relationship with his father. Instead of resentment, he could have shared in the joy of reconciliation and of forgiveness, a joy that God calls all of us to. In our lives, envy can creep in, especially when we see others blessed in ways that we want. But choosing to celebrate with them rather than envying them connects us to God's heart. We step into his joy, breaking free from the comparison trap. The Father's final words remind us, "You are always with me, and all that I have is yours." Like the older brother, we sometimes miss the truth, caught in our unfulfilled expectations. Yet God's love isn't earned. It's already ours, abundant and constant. When we start living in this love, we find peace, not by focusing on what we lack, but on the overwhelming richness of God's presence. When we truly see his presence in our lives, we experience transformation. We see others as God does, with joy and comparison, and we celebrate their victories, knowing we too are loved deeply. Embracing God's constant presence shifts us from resentment to rejoicing, allowing us to live fully in his love. As we prepare to close, we come to a crucial and final point that I don't want any of us to miss: realizing our place in the world, and more importantly, in God's family. The older brother had served faithfully by his father's side for years, yet he missed the depth of his role and relationship within the family. He thought of himself primarily as a dutiful servant instead of an heir. And because of this limited view, he failed to recognize the security, the value, and the privilege already his as his father's son. The older brother's reaction reveals a misunderstanding of his identity. When we saw the younger brother welcomed back, he responded with resentment, feeling as though his own years of service had somehow been undermined. How often do you and I fall into a similar trap, measuring our worth by what we do rather than who we are in God's eyes? We strive, we serve, and we sacrifice, and while those are all good things, they don't define our identity. Our identity is rooted in who God says we are, His beloved children. The older brother thought that he was simply fulfilling obligations, yet his father saw him as his treasured son. And God sees you and I the same way. We're not merely workers or servants in His kingdoms. We are His heirs. We are called to share in His love, His mission, and His joy. Realizing this truth frees us from the pressure of performing and lets us embrace our place in His family with confidence and joy. Comparison blinds us to our own blessings and distorts our understanding of God's love. The older brother felt slighted because he viewed his brother's welcome as a threat to his own standing. But God's love isn't like human love. It's not competitive. It's not limited. The father's love of his younger son did not lessen his love of the older brother. It was an extension of the same generous love available to both. When we measure ourselves against others, we start to believe that God's blessings are scarce, as though giving to one means taking from the other. But this story reminds us that God's love and blessings are boundless. Realizing our place in God's family helps us to see that His love isn't a pie with limited slices. It's like an overflowing river, abundant and never ending. We don't have to worry about whether others are loved more or better. In God's eyes, each of us is deeply and equally cherished, and His blessings aren't diminished by our neighbor's success. Sometimes we find ourselves standing outside God's celebration, feeling unworthy or burdened by bitterness, not realizing that God's invitation to joy is for us too. He calls us not to just work in His vineyard, but to celebrate in His house, to experience the freedom, the joy, the unity that comes with being His child. Embracing this invitation means setting aside our pride, our sense of entitlement, and our insecurities. It means stepping into the fullness of God's love with a heart ready to rejoice. Realizing our place in God's world means recognizing our role as His ambassadors. Just as the father wanted his older son to share in the family's joy, God wants us to share share His love with the world around us. We're not called to be gatekeepers of grace, deciding who's worthy of God's love. We're called to be vessels of His love, pouring it out freely and abundantly. The older brother struggled to celebrate his brother's redemption because he'd forgotten his own role as an heir of grace. When we remember our place in God's family, we no longer see others as competitors, but as co-heirs. We become people who celebrate restoration, who advocate for grace, and who welcome others with open arms. Realizing our place in God's world means understanding we're not only beneficiaries of His love, but also bearers of His love. The story is a powerful reminder that our relationship with God isn't transactional, it's transformative. We don't earn our place in His family through good deeds or faithful service. Our place is a gift. And when we realize this, our hearts are freed from the weight of comparison and entitlement. Instead, we're invited to step boldly into our identity as children of God, filled with His love and eager to share it with those around us. So as we close, let's ask ourselves, are we standing outside the celebration, or are we ready to step into the fullness of joy that God has for us? Are we living as distant workers or as beloved children, secure in our Father's love? The story of the older brother invites us to shift our perspective from entitlement to empathy, from bitterness to blessing. In God's family, we're called to accept others, to celebrate their victories, to recognize God's presence, and to live out our unique role in His purpose. Like the Father's invitation to the older son, God calls each of us to join in the celebration, to rejoice in His grace, and to fully embrace His love for others and ourselves. In the story of the prodigal son, we often focus on the wayward younger brother. But the older brother's experiences provides a powerful lesson in love and acceptance. As he struggles with bitterness and resentment upon his brother's return, we see how comparison and a sense of entitlement can cloud our understanding of grace. The Father's unconditional love for both sons illustrates that our worth isn't defined by our actions, but by our identity as beloved children of God. Embracing this truth frees us from jealousy and encourages us to celebrate the victories of others, recognizing that God's love and blessings are abundant and never diminished by someone else's joy. Ultimately, we are invited to move beyond resentment and into the fullness of God's love, celebrating each other's journey as part of one family under His grace. And here's where you can come in. You can be a part of the Hope Channel Canada family. Your support is vital in helping us continue this mission. By donating, you're not just giving, you're spreading hope and joy to those who need it most. To support our mission, please consider donating online by visiting agentsofhope.ca, where you'll find a variety of donation options. You can choose to donate using debit, credit, Google Pay, or Apple Pay. If you prefer to donate offline, you can send an e-transfer to agentsofhope@hopetv.ca. That's agentsofhope@hopetv.ca, or mail a check made payable to Hope Channel Canada at the following address: Hope Channel Canada, 1148 King Street East, Oshawa, Ontario, L1H1H8. Lastly, it's my pleasure to help you out. Feel free to give me a call at 1-855-4-HOPE-TV. That's 1-855-446-7388. And don't miss out on hopestudy.ca. That's a platform that's filled with lessons that guide you through the Bible and reveal more about God's love. Thank you so much for your generous support and your prayers.